Hiya, I'm Slingman, and I have some opinions on the new Homestuck animated show pilot. From the title, you might surmise that I don't have a particularly positive view of it. You might disagree with that, and that's fine. If you've been in the Homestuck community for a while, you probably know that discussions about the quality of whatever new piece of content media released by whatever body controls the IP this week tend to get a little toxic. I don't want to shame or make anyone feel bad about enjoying this cartoon. I am genuinely glad that you can derive happiness from what has become of the Homestuck IP. I sure wish I could. So with that being said, it's time to start the video. Before we get into my dread list of grievous sins, I'll start out with what I liked about the cartoon. The visuals are generally high effort and nice to look at. The animation is expressive, fluid and dynamic. The voice acting is great. Jade's design is really fantastic, but I'm biased because she's my favourite character. The music is nice and works well. Okay, that seems to be everything, so now let's get into the bad. John does a lot of talking in the pilot, voiced pretty much perfectly by Toby Fox. Unfortunately, that's where the compliments end. The biggest problem I have with John is how much nastier he is to his friends, constantly swearing at them and calling them names, and how out of character that is for him.
Dave's a filthy fucking liar. You're such a piece of shit, can you just look at- Ha! Bye, sucker!
Goodbye, John.
One of John's most prominent character traits in the comic is how much of a cheerful, happy-go-lucky kid he is. Very, very little ever seems to truly shake or piss him off in the first half of the comic. And this points to a deeper aspect of his character, his passive detachment from the world and lack of emotional investment into things that should really be more important to him. This is evidenced in his relative composure upon the death of his dad, or how he immediately forgives Terezi for sending him to his death, and is reflected in his aspect breath. He's a freely floating gust of wind unburdened by the gritty realities of the world. Furthermore, one of the most interesting parts of John's dialogue is how he deals with people trying to fuck with him. At any point, it's ambiguous whether he's pretending like he doesn't understand that he's being insulted in order to rage bait someone trying to troll him, or he's genuinely clueless about the whole situation. There is, throughout it all, a genuine love and kindness he always held for his friends. But he also had a rare but real ability to genuinely press people's buttons and hit them where it hurts when he wanted to, despite intentionally or inadvertently appearing as if he was just poking silly fun. Combine these aspects and more, and you have a nuanced and difficult tightrope of dialogue that this pilot falls off from the first step. John is constantly frustrated with and jeering at his friends, especially Dave in this episode, and it isn't just how John talks or thinks. His relationship with Dave is also devoid of the layers it's afforded in the comic. Dave relentlessly needles and ribs him, which sometimes happens in the comic, but it's the exception and not the rule. Reading through John and Dave's Act 1 dialogue, they're much more obviously best bros than you'd ever gather from this pilot, even with less total word count. We approach the vivziepop nadir of dialogue writing. Everyone is constantly making fun of each other, constantly sick of each other's shit, and constantly yelling. At the end of it all, we don't want to learn more about these two characters' relationship. Instead, we're left with a bunch of cheap jokes that revolve around someone making fun of someone for something inconsequential, and not very much else. Okay, that was supposed to be the end of the John section, but this line is so unbearably bad that I can't move on in good conscience until we've all listened to it again.
Then I'll shove my hand so far up its metal ass, the Postmaster General himself will feel the tingly touch of my probing magician's fingertips!
Dave. There's a reason this guy is the most popular character. There's a hell of a lot going on under his hood. But we can't expect a 10-minute pilot to be a Dave meta-analysis dump. What we can expect is the character to be even remotely similar to the guy from the comic, and if not that, for him to be interesting at all. But it seems that was expecting a little too much. Firstly, this may seem a little nitpicky, but Dave is constantly smiling. Why is he always smiling? Dave tries harder than anything else to always keep up an aloof, uninterested appearance. He wears sunglasses to bed. He shouldn't be grinning like the Cheshire Cat. Furthermore, he shouldn't talk as expressively as he does in the cartoon. Dave types in punctuationless, all lowercase, run-on sentences. He should be monotone, mumbly, and he shouldn't fucking laugh. Reading back Dave's dialogue for this video is giving me a fucking migraine, but I need to highlight some of the worst offenders here, because they're just too awful not to mention.
Hammer guy for life!
He would not fucking say that.
Classic. Egbert blunders into a mid-ass weapon for the rest of his damn life.
He would not fucking say that.
Let me know when you get the beta so I can keep being too cool to play it with you.
This one just blows me away. It's like Dave is a Pokemon who has to constantly repeat the one thing that the person writing this dialogue knows about him.
Shit,
I got my title drop with haste, bro. Up at the crack of dawn, early bird and all that. Just looked up at the sky, boom, there she fucks. Felt mad significant. Gave me a hella jolt of protag syndrome. Not that I'ma be the hero of this bitch. That's all you,
You're
bestie.
such a piece of shit.
I'm so tired. It's like if someone got the memo that Dave had a predilection for going into long funny monologues and decided to try their hand at writing one without reading any of them. Or didn't realise that it's extremely difficult to write something like that and make it actually funny. Here's a good Dave monologue. Pause to read it and try and tell the difference. Listen, I'm not a good enough writer to know in depth why this is so much better than the example from the pilot. A combination of a strong command over the English language, a good ear for phonetics, and a zero filler relentless pace contribute, but there's an X factor I'm missing. My point at the end of the day is that Dave's lines in the pilot just aren't fucking funny. I would have been okay with this whole thing gutting Act 1 of any depth or interest between the story and characters and presentation, but if it was just fucking funny, I would have been fine. But here we are. There she fucks is so insanely bad I don't even have the words to express it. It's literally the vivziepop meme of saying random swear words that don't make sense for no reason, but even worse, it's beyond parody. In general though, Dave was probably the biggest miss of this whole thing. As I've said before, my criticism of this is not that it's not exactly like the comic, it's bad on its own merits, even divorced from the comic, because there is just nothing there with this character in this cartoon. He is a one-dimensional, annoying, snarky sidekick who exists to torment John, and that's basically all there is to say on the matter. Next. Rose was voice acted pretty well, but the mixing is really quiet on her for some reason, and she's constantly being like drowned out by sound effects. Anyway, let's get straight into the egregious dialogue.
Sorry, John. I just lose all sense of composure when I catch the slightest glimpse of his PFP in my DMs.
First off, this sentence is really clunky. Slightest glimpse sounds really out of place and odd here, and saying the anagrams out loud sucks. I don't know why people do this when writing lines to be spoken out loud. Secondly, this is definitely a nitpick, but I feel like saying PFP and DMs just kind of robs the whole thing of the whole middle internet 2009 vibe. I'm not into it. Thirdly, this is an obvious downgrade from a similar line from the comic that could have been inserted in just fine. Listen.
I can't control myself. I must have a weakness for insufferable pricks.
This line is better because it just flows and sounds better without clunky anagrams. Weakness for insufferable pricks. The drawn out, sibilant and fricative insufferable is punctuated perfectly by the doubly plosive pricks. The line from the pilot comes after,
I don't know, you listen to him.
which makes Rose's assertion about how attracted she is to him come wildly out of left field. Combine this with the fact that it barely puts in any work to show us that she's mostly joking, and we don't even know she has a predilection for sarcasm yet, and you get a nonsensical conversation that doesn't flow at all and isn't funny. On the other hand, the line from the comic comes after John saying, "You should probably stop hitting on him all the time," or whatever. So Rose's counter jab that makes it extremely obvious she's joking about being attracted to him makes a lot more sense and is believable as a way she would respond. This is just a sad one because it was right there. You could have just lifted the text straight from the comic and it would have worked perfectly.
I think you are about to confess something to me, John.
Rose teasing boys about their sexuality is something she does early in the comic. Importantly though, she does it to Dave. This makes a lot more sense when said to Dave because of his obsession with maintaining a facade of masculinity and his own internalized homophobia, and Rose's shrewd understanding of these aspects of his character. Said to John, it's a lot less meaningful because if John were acting like John, he wouldn't give a fuck. He would just go, haha, okay Rose, and change the subject and never think about it again.
John, you're not wearing one of your silly disguises, are you?
This is dumb as fuck because John just said he was on a stealth mission. In the comic, he hadn't said anything like that, so Rose correctly guessing he was wearing a disguise suggested that they were such good friends and Rose had such a good read on his psyche that she could tell when he was wearing a disguise just from the way he typed. Here, the joke of John revealing that he was all along doesn't make any sense at all because he already gave a good reason why he might be wearing one. Plus, the ending of this exchange is the same thing I was talking about earlier, where every character is constantly teasing each other and sick of each other's bullshit.
John, please install it with alacrity.
Fanfiction Rose is a very well documented phenomenon in the community at this point. People who aren't good at reading or writing think that they can sound like Rose if they use the biggest and most obscure words they know, with little consideration for anything else. Moving on. In contrast to the rest of the characters, I enjoyed seeing Jade on screen. Her voice actor is great, the art is really fun and cute, and she isn't too out of character. There's still a little to talk about though.
Did you get my present?
It's an important point of Jade's characterization early in the comic that, like John, she almost never gets angry at someone or raises her voice, even when she should. This is for a different reason than John though. Jade's neglected and isolated early life causes her to see the friendships she's cultivated now as incredibly precious, and she's very careful not to do anything at all to cause conflict in a conversation. She has the learned behavior of a doormat, always yielding and acquiescing. Losing her temper with John here flies in the face of this detail. Furthermore, it reads almost like a childish tantrum, and combined with the cutesy way in which she's drawn and her reluctance to use swearing contrasted with John and Dave's free consciousness barrage of cursing and vitriol, we get the impression that Jade is significantly younger than the rest of the cast. Of course, early in the comic she definitely also reads as a bit immature compared to the rest of the kids, but it's clear that her unfailingly friendly and positive interactions are a function of a very conscious way she's chosen to present herself to the world. And that self-definition and control is emblematic of a slightly more mature person than the Jade we see in the pilot. These are minor nitpicks though. The narrator continues the trend of a poor understanding of the source material even when directly quoting the comic word for word. The pilot seems to view the narrator as existing only to provide meta-comedy, with John showing an explicitly adversarial relationship with it from the word go.
Zeus smell poop lord!
It's John, actually. John Egbert.
Zeus smell poop lord!
This continues throughout the episode as John squabbles with Dave about not having turned it off and constantly yells for the narrator to shut up. It's true that in early Homestuck there are examples of John conflicting with the narrator, but for the most part the narrator is detached, neutral, and usually states what's going on in John's head. There is no indication that John is perpetually aware that his thoughts and actions are being narrated. Obviously, the character's thoughts style of narrator is not suited for a cartoon at all, so the fact that the pilot doesn't have that is fine. But by immediately cashing in its chips by acknowledging the narrator and only using it for some cheap gags, the pilot sets itself up for failure in future episodes. The influence of narration, and on people who write stories in general, is very central to Homestuck. The story raises countless questions about the relationship between an author and their story, how a disembodied narration would affect characters in a story if you suppose them to be real people, and explores some of the malicious and sinister undertones of the control that being an inherently trustworthy narrator affords you. By stating off the bat that all characters in this story are always explicitly aware of the narrator and regard it as an inconsequential nuisance, the pilot shows that it isn't interested in any of this nuance surrounding the idea of a narrator in future episodes without severe retconning. But that's not the only problem with the narrator. Another is how the scene from page 82 is treated. In the comic proper, page 82 is a wistful, contemplative pause that evokes a feeling of implacable discontent. It's really the first time Homestuck suggested something greater than just being a silly internet story about fucking around with Silodexes. I think it's the most important page in Act 1. It reframes the way you think about the story so far by introducing a new depth to John and his suburban surroundings. It invites you to reconsider exactly why Dad's face is blank and he doesn't speak, why we haven't seen any of John's neighbours, and introduces some of John's deeper character traits and faults to be elaborated on later. In the pilot, however, the monologue is spoken irreverently and exaggeratedly.
The streets are empty. Wind skims the voids, keeping neighbors apart, as if grazing the hollow of a cut reed or, say, a plundered mailbox. A familiar note is produced. It's the one desolation plays to keep its instrument in tune. It is your 13th birthday, and as with all 12 preceding it, something feels missing from
Mute
your
narration!
You almost get the sense that the episode is trying to create comedy out of the sincerity of the passage. It falls flat because this passage simply wasn't written to try and be an exaggerated bluster of self-serious prose. The pilot has no depth to offer to replace it, and would rather half-heartedly mock its own source material. As the cherry on top, it is interrupted in possibly its most important and affecting line by John shooing the narrator away. The way this links in with my previous thoughts on the narrator is obvious.
Yeah, well, I'm not playing it. LOL, not even ironically.
Please, John. And you guys say I'm spacey?
When you say it like that, Jade, it sounds like you know the future.
Whatever you may think about how faithful an adaptation should be, I do this not to say that this isn't a one-to-one reproduction of the comic, therefore it's bad, but to try and highlight how much depth and nuance of Homestuck is completely missing from the pilot, and to question exactly how the creators of the show plan to tell a good story with interesting characters from this empty and poorly written beginning. If the pilot had offered anything else of substance that wasn't directly lifted from Homestuck, I would be very happy. It's just that it doesn't even try, and we're left with an ineffectual 10 minutes that fail to tell or set up a good story and introduce us to characters worth learning more about. The pilot isn't bad because it's not a reproduction of the comic. It fails at being a good show on its own merits. And, at the end of the day, this has the word Homestuck on it, front and center. It uses the characters that exist from the comic. And by cross-referencing with the comic, we can understand why this cartoon rings so flat and lifeless. How can you expect a 10-minute pilot to adequately represent all of these characters with a fraction of the dialogue? I don't, it's just what we got instead doesn't even try to capture even the most surface level aspects of the characters, as well as being flat and pathetic on its own merits. You just hate it because it's not exactly like the comic. No, I hate it because it's bad. Also, if you use characters from a pre-existing work and paint your work as an adaptation, it's like a bare minimum requirement for said characters to be remotely similar to those from the original work. The comic wasn't as good as you remember, you just have rose-tinted glasses. Yes it is, I've read it like 8 times. The kids swear at each other all the time in the comic, it reads exactly the same way as they're doing here. I highly suggest you reread the comic or at least Act 1 and then watch the pilot again. If you still feel that way, then I don't know, we probably just have a fundamental difference of opinion and that's fine. You're reading too much into the comic and it doesn't actually have this depth that you describe to it. You are wrong and bad at reading. I don't think Dave is really that different from the comic. You are wrong and bad at reading. I don't really care about any of the reasons you said for disliking it and enjoyed it a lot. That's fantastic. It's just silly fun, why are you being so negative? Because I desperately wanted this to be something worth being excited about and a return to quality for the Homestuck IP. If it isn't obvious from the fact that this video exists, I still care about Homestuck a lot, and the backslide it's been careening down for arguably nearly 10 years makes me sad. I see a lot of potential in something like this that I hate to see abused this way. I don't know whether this pilot will be eventually made into a full series. As much as I disliked it, the response seems to be generally positive, and its existence will doubtless draw more people into reading the comic, so I begrudgingly state that I hope we get a continuation. Maybe Andrew will actually write the next one so it won't be unbearable horseshit. If the series does continue, it has some problems to work through. The core of Homestuck is, as it always has remained, its complex, expertly written, three-dimensional characters, and their captivating relationships and journeys. The pilot has given me no indication that it is interested in putting in the effort to do justice to the most important thing that can make this series worth watching. Being able to play around with these fantastic characters is the greatest thing you have, and you're throwing it down the drain. I don't have any idea how these characters or this story specifically can change and grow from this point. You're starting from a rotten foundation, haven't done any work to set yourself up for success, and expect to just coast based on the quality of the visuals and the empty gratification of seeing skinwalkers of our favourite characters animated and voiced. If all you want to do is make the fans squeal for a few minutes before your work is forgotten about and tossed on the pile with the countless other substanceless pretty faces that characterise post-canon Homestuck, that's fine. But I have higher hopes for what's possible with this kind of money and talent behind it. It's a shame they seem to have been misplaced. Thanks for watching.